I clutched my fork tighter than I probably should have, my palms sweating under the weight of what I was about to say. The turkey had been carved, mashed potatoes glistening, cranberry sauce sitting perfectly in its dish, and the room was buzzing with my family's usual chaos. Then, I took a deep breath, looked across the long dining table at all those familiar faces, and said the words I had been rehearsing for weeks. I finally got the promotion. The room froze. My father, Richard Carter, let out a sharp, incredulous laugh that cut through the tension like glass. My brother Jason smirked, leaning back in his chair as if he had been waiting for this moment for years. My stomach sank. Promotion? You? Dad's voice was dripping with mockery. Don't make me laugh. You're still just a kid playing office games. My chest tightened. I had prepared myself for congratulations. Maybe even a little jealousy from my brother, but not this. Not the derision I had grown up with, the kind that left you shrinking in your own skin. Before I go on, I want to know, where are you listening from right now? Drop it in the comments. I love seeing how far my story reaches. Mom, as usual, tried to smooth things over. Richard, honey, let's just enjoy dinner. But her words barely registered over Dad's booming laughter. I felt my face flush crimson as everyone at the table turned to stare at me, some with curiosity, others with smirks that said, "We told you so." Jason leaned over and whispered loud enough for half the table to hear, "Yeah, congrats, Emily, on moving from intern to what exactly?" His words stung, slicing through me sharper than any blade. And hey, if you enjoy stories where people rise above betrayal and humiliation, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. I promise, this story is about to get intense, and you won't want to miss a single moment. I wanted to retreat, to vanish under the table, but I forced myself to sit tall, gripping the edge of my chair, reminding myself that this promotion was mine. Every late night, every overlooked idea, every email that went unanswered, all of it had led to this moment. But the tension wasn't over. Dad's eyes glinted with something I couldn't quite place, amusement, disdain, or maybe something darker. Then came the words that would mark the beginning of one of the most humiliating nights of my life. "Remember that internship your uncle helped you get? Without that, you'd still be at the bottom like everyone expected." The room erupted, not in laughter, but in that uncomfortable, tense silence that makes your ears ring and your chest ache. Mom's hands trembled slightly as she pressed her napkin to her lips. My brother Jason leaned back smugly, folding his arms. And I just wanted to crawl into myself and disappear. I remember the years growing up under Dad's shadow, the subtle jabs disguised as jokes, the belittling comments at family gatherings, the endless comparisons to my brother. And now, even in my first taste of real success, he found a way to humiliate me publicly. But something shifted in me at that moment. That flush of shame was quickly replaced with a spark of anger, a quiet, burning fire that whispered, "This isn't over." Not by a long shot. I realized, sitting there at that table, that the family who had mocked, undermined, and doubted me, they had no idea who I was capable of becoming. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur. Conversations became background noise as I stared down at my untouched plate. I noticed small details, the way Dad's tie was slightly askew, the faint scuff on Jason's expensive shoes, the way Cousin Rachel kept glancing at her phone, pretending not to notice the tension. Every little thing became a clue, a piece of a puzzle I wasn't ready to share yet. And yet, every so often, Dad would shoot me that look again, a mixture of mockery and curiosity. He didn't know it, but I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The game had begun, and he had no idea he was already losing. As I finally pushed my plate away and excused myself from the table, a thought ran through my mind. They think they've won tonight, but they have no idea what I'm capable of. If you want to see exactly how I turned this humiliation into something they'll never forget, and how Dad and Jason's arrogance sets them up for a downfall, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Trust me, this story is only going to get darker, more shocking, and way more satisfying. And don't forget, comment below where you're watching from. I love reading all your messages and connecting with each of you as the story unfolds. The bedroom door clicked shut behind me, and I let out a long, shaky breath. My hand still trembled, gripping the edge of the dresser. The laughter at the dinner table, Dad's mocking tone, and Jason's smug smirk were still ringing in my ears. I hated how small I felt in that moment, but I also hated that I had let it affect me. I walked over to the window, staring out at the crisp Chicago evening. Streetlights flickered across the snow-dusted lawns of our suburban neighborhood, and somewhere down the block, kids were playing with leftover pumpkin pie. Everything looked so ordinary, so peaceful, and yet, inside me, a storm was brewing. How had I spent my entire life letting this man, my father, belittle me? I sank into the chair by my desk and let my mind drift. I could still remember the first time Dad laughed at me in front of the family. I must have been 10, holding a little trophy from a school science fair. He had leaned back, chuckled, and said, "Cute, but don't get used to thinking you're special." And there had been countless other moments, small, cruel digs that left their mark over the years. Jason, always ready to mimic my failures or flaunt his own accomplishments, had only made it worse. My mom, sweet as she was, often stepped back, too polite or too afraid to intervene. But now it was different. After a while, I forced myself to get up. I wandered over to the living room, where the remnants of Thanksgiving dinner sat. Plates stacked, gravy bowls half empty, napkins crumpled. The family had dispersed, some to the living room to watch football, others to their phones, scrolling silently. I noticed Dad still sitting on the couch, nursing a glass of wine, looking self-satisfied, smug in a way that made my blood boil. Jason was scrolling through his phone, pretending not to watch me, but I could feel his eyes on me, always evaluating, always waiting to pounce. I couldn't let it go. Not this time. I wandered toward the kitchen to clear my mind and accidentally stumbled upon something that froze me in place. Dad had left his laptop open on the counter. Curiosity, and maybe a spark of hope, pulled me closer. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Names, numbers, accounts, and what caught my eye immediately were the suspicious transactions. Dad had been funneling company money into accounts that didn't make sense. And there were emails, secret conversations with someone outside the company, plans to cover up mistakes he'd made that could ruin him if they ever came to light. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. A chill ran down my spine, but also a thrill. For the first time, I realized Dad wasn't untouchable. There were cracks in the armor, vulnerabilities he had hidden from everyone, vulnerabilities I could exploit. I felt that quiet, simmering fire in my chest again, the one that had started at the dinner table. And this time, it had a direction. I paced the living room, thinking about the possibilities. Every memory of humiliation, the mocking laugh at dinner, the subtle digs over the years, the way he always made me feel small, fueled my determination. I didn't want revenge that was obvious or petty. I wanted strategic, undeniable, humiliating justice. And I knew exactly where it could begin. Jason would be the first to learn a lesson. He had been arrogant, careless, and foolish. Dad had made a career of thinking he could manipulate and control everyone. But I was about to show them both that the game had changed. The next morning, the house was buzzing with relatives again, some lingering from Thanksgiving, others returning for leftovers or late-night pie. Mom offered me a quiet, sympathetic smile, but I could tell she was worried. She had always loved me, even if she didn't have the backbone to stand up to Dad. Jason, of course, couldn't resist a jab. "Hey, champ. Feeling fancy after your big promotion?" I smiled almost imperceptibly, letting him think I was fragile. Let him think I'm fragile. Later that afternoon, I found myself in the study where Dad kept all his personal files, financial statements, business contracts, confidential letters. I skimmed through the documents and emails, realizing the sheer scale of what he was hiding. Mistakes, lies, favoritism, and hints of unethical deals that could, if revealed, ruin him socially and financially. The fire in me burned hotter. Tonight, they mocked me. Tomorrow, the rules change. I felt a surge of anticipation, my mind racing with plans. But I had to be careful. Subtlety was key. I didn't want them to suspect me until it was too late. I closed the study door, the files safely tucked under my arm. I could feel the tension in the house as Dad and Jason continued their routines, completely unaware of the storm brewing just steps away. I knew one thing for certain. The next time they laughed at me, it wouldn't be so easy. And when the first domino fell, the others would follow. The house was quiet that evening, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound accompanying my thoughts. Dad had retreated to his study, probably reviewing some old emails or patting himself on the back for the Thanksgiving theatrics, and Jason had disappeared upstairs, earbuds in, probably scrolling through social media pretending he wasn't eavesdropping. I sat cross-legged on my bed, the files I had discovered still open on my laptop. Every spreadsheet, every email, every hidden account, it all painted a picture of my father and brother as arrogant, careless, and most importantly, vulnerable. They think I'm fragile. They think I'm naive. They think I'll just stay quiet and let them mock me forever. I smiled at the thought. Over the next few days, I moved like a shadow in my own home, quietly observing and taking notes. Dad had routines, predictable patterns, little cracks in his perfectionist armor. He loved being the center of attention at work, at family gatherings, everywhere. And his overconfidence made him careless. Jason was no better. His arrogance was a second skin. He bragged, he overplayed, and he underestimated me at every turn. Every conversation, every laugh, every side-eye glance he gave me only confirmed that my strategy didn't need to be obvious. It needed to be invisible until the moment of execution. This was not about revenge for revenge's sake. It was about precision. The first step was subtle. I began planting ideas in casual conversations, testing reactions. A joke here, a compliment there, watching how Dad and Jason would react. For example, at dinner, I casually mentioned a project at work where I had led a team. Dad scoffed. "That's nice, Emily. Did you actually do anything important? Or was it just paperwork?" I nodded, smiled faintly, and said nothing more. The spark in his eyes told me he thought I was still inferior, exactly what I wanted him to believe. Jason, meanwhile, rolled his eyes and muttered, "Typical. Perfect." Both of them were overconfident and dismissive. One afternoon, I approached Dad with a casual question about the company's latest project, pretending to be naive. He launched into a long explanation, full of self-congratulations and exaggerations. I listened carefully, making mental notes of contradictions and exaggerations he had let slip. Later that evening, Jason tried to correct me during dinner. He had overheard my conversation and was smug, assuming he had caught me lying. I let him think he had won. I smiled inside. Every move I made was invisible to them, but I could feel the pieces slowly falling into place. With every passing day, my confidence grew. The humiliation from Thanksgiving still burned in the back of my mind, but it had transformed. It was no longer pain, it was fuel. Fuel that sharpened my focus, honed my strategy, and reminded me that I wasn't the naive girl they thought I was. I had spent years being underestimated, and now I had the upper hand. While browsing through Dad's financial files one evening, I discovered something new, an email thread revealing that he had been misleading family members and colleagues about certain investments, lies that, if revealed, could be socially and professionally devastating. I also noticed Jason's arrogance had created opportunities. He had bragged publicly about accomplishments he hadn't fully earned, leaving gaps I could exploit. The stage was set, but I had to wait. I couldn't strike too early. Timing was everything. Before we go further, I want you to think for a moment. Have you ever felt underestimated by someone you cared about? I want to hear your story. Drop it in the comments below. The week passed slowly, every day a careful dance of observation and patience. I made sure to remain calm, polite, and almost invisible, exactly as I had planned. At home, Dad carried on with his self-important routine. Jason strutted around as though he owned the world, and I quietly sharpened my edge. And then, the perfect opportunity appeared. It was a company gala, a formal event Dad insisted we all attend. He had boasted to friends and colleagues alike about his influence and achievements. Jason, naturally, would be there, basking in the attention and throwing around his usual arrogant jokes. I knew this was it. The venue was elegant, a banquet hall in downtown Chicago, crystal chandeliers glimmering above, the murmur of polite conversation filling the air. Dad was in his element, shaking hands, charming executives, and smiling just enough to seem approachable. Jason was bragging loudly about a recent project, drawing laughter and applause, completely unaware of the trap I had prepared. And me, I was quiet, almost invisible. Just Emily Carter, the underestimated, the mocked, the quiet storm in the corner. I had planted little breadcrumbs over the past week. A friend in Dad's office, someone I had quietly gained trust with, mentioned offhand that certain financial records weren't adding up. I didn't say a word to Dad. He wouldn't even notice. Jason, however, loved to repeat gossip without thinking. As expected, during the cocktail portion, Jason casually mentioned the discrepancies in front of Dad's colleagues, completely unaware of how precarious the situation was. His arrogance blinded him. This was it. I leaned back and let the dominoes fall. Dad began answering, flustered, fumbling for explanations, unaware that his lies were about to be exposed. He had always been so careful in private, but now, surrounded by people who respected him professionally, his arrogance collided with his careless handling of the truth. I didn't need to intervene. All I had to do was watch. A colleague, someone who had been quietly suspicious of Dad's dealings, raised questions about a report Dad had proudly presented weeks ago. And suddenly, the truth emerged. An error, a misrepresentation, a lie that made Dad look foolish in front of everyone. The laughter was subtle at first, polite smiles, but then it grew. Dad's face went red, his charm faltering, his carefully constructed image cracking in real time. Jason, trying to save face, jumped in to defend him, but he only made it worse, mixing facts he didn't know and exposing his own arrogance. This was better than I imagined. I leaned against the wall, feeling the tension in the room, every glance from Dad and Jason burning into my memory. This wasn't just about public embarrassment, it was a message. For years, they had treated me like I was insignificant. For years, they had laughed at my efforts and mocked my achievements. And now, quietly, I had flipped the script. I didn't revel in cruelty, I reveled in justice. The power balance had shifted, and for the first time in my life, I felt untouchable. But just when I thought the night couldn't get better, it did. Amid the murmurs and awkward glances, Dad's phone buzzed. He excused himself to check it, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw the message that would change everything. Someone had discovered another of his hidden secrets, one I hadn't yet known. And now, it wasn't just Dad and Jason in trouble. The message hinted at a betrayal even deeper than I had imagined. A financial mistake, yes, but also a personal secret that, if exposed, could humiliate him in front of not only his colleagues but the entire family. I felt a thrill of anticipation. This twist wasn't part of my plan, but it was perfect. The chaos would now accelerate, and the first domino had fallen beautifully. Dad returned, trying to mask his panic with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Jason looked at me once, suspicion flickering, but he didn't know what I knew. I had become the calm in the storm, the quiet presence no one took seriously, yet I held all the cards. Inside, I felt a strange mix of triumph and anticipation. I hadn't just won this round, I had laid the foundation for the rest of my plan. The humiliation they suffered tonight was only the beginning. I stepped out onto the balcony for a moment and whispered to myself. They thought this was just another night, just another dinner, just another family event. But they have no idea the real game has only begun. The city lights of Chicago glimmered outside my apartment window as I sipped my coffee, mind replaying the events of the gala. Dad's smug face, Jason's overconfidence. It all fueled the fire that had been simmering for years. But I knew the first strike at the gala had been just a taste. The real payoff, the moment when they would truly understand the consequences of underestimating me, was coming. The opportunity came unexpectedly. One quiet evening, while reviewing the files I'd collected over the past month, I realized I had enough evidence, not just to expose Dad socially, but to bring him down legally. Emails, hidden accounts, falsified documents, financial misconduct, everything lined up perfectly. Dad's arrogance had left a trail, and Jason's carelessness only strengthened the case. I knew exactly what I had to do. The following Sunday, the family gathered for a casual brunch at Mom's house. Dad arrived, smiling, oblivious, confident in his carefully maintained image. Jason strutted in already, boasting about recent successes. Everyone still underestimated me, including Mom. But I had patience and evidence. I waited, letting Dad and Jason dominate the conversation, letting them reveal themselves through arrogance, lies, and careless bragging. Every word they spoke, every casual slip, only confirmed the patterns I needed. I began subtly weaving questions into the conversation. Dad, Didn't the finance team mention those discrepancies in the quarterly report? Dad laughed nervously. Oh, that? Nothing to worry about, Emily. Just a small clerical mistake. Jason jumped in, trying to defend him, and in doing so, revealed additional missteps he didn't realize were on record. Each statement, each attempt to cover up, fed the case I had built silently for weeks. By the time dessert was served, Dad's composure was cracking. He was sweating, fumbling over explanations, unaware that I had already forwarded all the files to the authorities, anonymously, earlier that morning. It happened faster than I expected. The sound of knocking at the door startled the family. Dad opened it, confused. 2 police officers stood there, badges gleaming under the sunlight streaming through the windows. Richard Carter, one officer asked. You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and multiple financial crimes. Dad's mouth opened, but no words came out. Jason froze, eyes wide. The room fell silent. Mom gasped, clutching her chest, while I stood back quietly, observing the chaos with calm satisfaction. Years of mockery, humiliation, and belittlement had ended in this moment. The officers led Dad out in handcuffs. He turned to look at me, disbelief and fear etched across his face. I said nothing. I didn't need to. My eyes said it all. You underestimated me. And now justice is served. I felt a mix of emotions, relief, satisfaction, and a strange, quiet pride. This wasn't just revenge. This was justice. The man who had spent decades mocking, controlling, and undermining me was finally powerless. Jason slumped into his chair, ashamed, finally realizing how fragile his father's empire really was. Mom's eyes met mine, a silent acknowledgement of my courage and perseverance. I didn't celebrate out loud. I didn't gloat. I simply allowed the truth to stand, letting the consequences speak for themselves. Sitting alone later that evening, I replayed the events in my mind. Every jab at Thanksgiving, every mocking comment, every sneer, they had all fueled me. And now, I had claimed not just respect, but justice. I realized that revenge wasn't about malice. It was about reclaiming your power and standing tall when others have tried to tear you down. I had finally done that, and no one could ever take it away from me. I want to ask you, have you ever faced someone who constantly underestimated you and dreamed of proving them wrong? Comment below and let me know where you're watching from. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell.